Talking about the middle class paranoia, that's not something we commonly discuss. We discuss about middle class imagination, middle class aspiration, creativity, so on. But in the era of COVID or corona virus, middle class paranoia is something that is coming forward, and we should perhaps perceive more importantly than ever. And paranoia as perception of death, that's what my current concern is for today's discussion. Well, the white collar middle class do have their perceptions, expressions of, and perceptions about in the cultural fronts, in the artistic fronts, and in philosophical aspects. They do have perceptions, they do have expressions about or on death throughout, mostly in artistic practices. They do have expressions on death, about their imagination, about their longing, or rather construction of death, as they expect death to be into their life. And most importantly, in the political rhetorics. In the political rhetorics, mostly by the middle class white collar professionals, they do have death as a symbol of glory, of power, of sacrifice, of dedication. So from art to politics, there are perceptions and expressions about death that are prevalent in the artistic practices, in the literary practices, and in the political rhetorics. But by political rhetorics, I do also mean the everyday discussions that we do have in our everyday life. For example, well, we accept death for the goodness of the people, for the goodness of the nation, and so on. So there are the expressions about death that are for the good reasons, that are for the mass people, that are for the greater interest of society, what is being constructed as society, or in most cases of the nation, in a nation-state based cultural onset. And in artistic practices, there are plenty of forms that death is being glorified, death has been glorified, from Tagore's Moron Retu Humo Shamo Shamon to the ways the modern painters and singers are portraying in not only in the rock and roll movement, but also in other popular cultural movements. So middle class people are familiar with the perception of death. They do have their own ways of expressing death, and their willingness to accept death for the greater cause or for the subversive causes. Saying so, this might be the first time in our living time that death is being perceived so next door, so coming towards you, and you are not prepared. So that's where I am coming from. So all the artistic practices, all the cultural expressions, the political rhetorics, and what I didn't mention till now is the medical discussions about death. Perhaps I need a little note on that as well. Being the internet surfer and the cyber consumers, most of the middle class people around the world, regardless of their backgrounds, the differences in the background, they do look for the disease, the symptoms of the disease, causes of the disease. That they do have their own knowledge to gather from the net, and they are actually getting on to have the fear of death or the diseases itself. So at some point it's ironical to have more knowledge and become more fearful. So, and that's where I am more interested about the whole bunch of new knowledge, and I'm skeptical about the whole thing. So The medical discussion about death or diseases, that's I'm keeping aside from today's discussion because that is so say overtly different and so overtly complicated. But from political to cultural to intellectual discussions about death by the middle class people around the globe, across the globe, that have their own cultural and intellectual meanings and is very celebrated in artistic forms, in cultural practices, in intellectual discussions. You might call it, for example, a philosophical understanding of death. But when this pandemic virus came, the last thing you can actually think of a huge volume of threat, perhaps AIDS. There might be debate on that, if it is SARS, if it is swine flu, if it is some other things. But the point is that a pandemic fear, or rather a global fear that came, just for an example, I do not have particular statistics about which fear surpasses what. But the point is that 30 years back, 40 years back, you did have AIDS as a global fear came out from the middle class practices. That's not something you could dump onto a particular nation or location that, well, we don't have any kind of AIDS threat. We are not in that comfort zone. So from that aspect, I mean to say, within last 30, 40 years, this is something we are facing upfront. And coronavirus caused a new kind of fear, or rather this fear can be perceived as global, perceived across the border, and perhaps this is the first time you are watching your own people, the class you came from, the peer group that you work with, the people you talk to, and they are feared. And that particular onset of paranoia, that backdrop of paranoia, is what we are working on and what we are working at. So that paranoia is the onset of the expressions that are coming from your friend from New York or your colleague from Kolkata. So this is a new scenario. This is a new scenario that the middle class people are dealing death with real fear. No fantasy attached, no romanticization, no glorification. From political rhetorics to artistic practices, this fear came upfront into your face, the very next door stranger that you are waiting to open the door for. So that's where I am coming from, that now on this aspect, when the fear is so evident and evident in the like-minded people, perhaps this is the first time in your lifetime that we are seeing our own people being fearful as death, for its arbitrariness, for its uncertainty, and for its straightforward outcomes. You don't have anything on your desk. You don't know about the disease. You don't know the particular symptoms that you should have been known, and you don't know if you are or if our people are going to die. So it's more like walking without a safety net. You are walking on a rope, but you don't have a safety net beneath your feet. So this is the first time that you are seeing your own people without having those artistic expressions attached with death, the cultural manifestation attached with the death, and the political rhetorics that portraying death as a superhero kind of thing for your nation, for your people, no matter whatever those mean, nation or people. But this is the first time that death is being evident in front of our people, and they actually don't know how to deal with that. So my understanding or point would be that all the discourses of death by the middle class people, their artistic missions, their cultural ventures, all are actually that fell apart. That fell apart due to the very fear, the paranoia they have created for their own, and all the artistic and cultural practices they have been doing for years, that's all in vain and lost its context.